In this presentation, I'll cover both the break and the break at point commands. The break at point is a nice command. It gives you a nice feature of taking something that's already existing as an entity and breaking it into two separate entities. The actual break command is not very valuable because the trim command will do the same thing, and yet easier and more effectively. So let's just start with the break command. I can briefly show you how that works. I would go to break. If I select break, I'll select my object, and what it does is it tells you to pick another breakpoint. When I do that, it breaks off the entity approximately from where I first selected it to approximately where I last selected it. So it broke off that piece in between. So again, it's not very accurate, where trim could be accurate of breaking an object or entity if you have some cutting edges. You might have to draw temporary cutting edges in some cases. I'm going to go back to the break command, and I'm going to say break. I'll select an object. There is an option called first, so if I go F for first, enter, now I can reselect my first breakpoint, and I'm going to turn on my object snap to do that. So if I want it to break from that point to this point, notice that it would break the bottom portion of that circle. So I typed in F for the first option, which gave me the opportunity to reselect the first point of the break, and then I selected the second point of the break, and in both cases using object snap, so I was very precise at what point I was breaking the object at. I'm going to undo. Again, trim, kind of a little bit better feature. If I use trim, select line as my cutting edge, enter, pick the lower half of the circle, and it's easier to trim than it is to break. I'll undo again. So that's the break command, a little bit obsolete due to trim, but break at point is a little bit different. I'm going to select break at point, I'm going to select my line up on top, and it says specify first breakpoint, and I select it, and notice now I have an entity on the left side and a separate entity on the right side of that line. I'll do that same thing again. Notice I have one entire entity across the screen. I'll hit escape. I'll use break at point, select that same entity, and using not snap but object snap, picking that, I have a separate entity on the left side and a separate entity on the right side. Notice that angled line is all one entity. I will use break at point again. I will select an entity, select the midpoint, and I have two separate entities, one on the top and one on the bottom. Hit enter to end. Those are the two break commands, break and break at point. I prefer using break at point to separate an entity that is one entity into two separate entities at a given or specific point using object snap. Or you can use break with the first option, which allows you to be precise in your selecting of points. It works good that way, but also know that the trim command works just as easy and maybe even more efficient than the break command. So go ahead and practice those, doodle some things on your screen, and if you have any questions, make sure to contact me. And this will wrap up the presentation for the break and break at point commands.